As we prepare for school resumption, it is important that we nurture greatness in our students, and it begins with an holistic understanding of each child, especially if they have any personal issues that can affect their achievement in school. For instance, if a student has a learning disability, you must understand that the student has some strengths too, and the student is equally intelligent, just that the brain of that child is wired differently. So you must have an holistic understanding of that child's peculiar condition or situation, because without that you know exactly what to do to nurture that child for greatness. It's important that we see their strengths and even their weaknesses, and even some information from their parents and from other teachers as well. For instance, when you are dealing with a student that you teach English as a subject, you may need information from the maths teacher of that student so that you can fully understand what that student is going through, or what he or she really needs from you. So there's a need for shared support too, and that is what this session is about. We are going to talk about practical strategies for supporting students with learning difficulties and learning disabilities such as dyslexia, ADHD, and even underachieving students. We're going to also talk about slow learners too, because these are very common. Slow learners are common too in our schools, so it's important that we talk about them too. By the end of this session, you'll be able to recognize challenges and strengths in students with learning difficulties, learning disabilities, and even slow learners and underachieving students. You'll be able to use practical strategies to support these students in their classrooms. You'll be able to link the teaching strategies that you can use to the broader goal of nurturing each student's greatness. So you remember when I said the brain is like a city with roads leading to a destination called learning. Yeah, I said that in the last session. Now, on these roads are different cars carrying information in different subjects. For a maths topic, for instance, a maths car enters the road, which is called input. It follows the road signs and direction, to process information. Then it parks in a garage for storage. First it can park in a temporary lot for short-term memory storage, and if that short-term memory is reinforced, you can move it into a larger long-term storage, in form of long-term memory. Now finally, the car drives out again when needed. The analogy I just made just explains what we call the 4 steps of cognitive processing, which are input, processing, storage, and output. So if a car struggles at any of the 4 stages, that's a cognitive processing issue. And this can happen on temporarily blocked roads, as in learning difficulties, or even if the student has a learning disability, meaning that he needs expert intervention. So when students struggle at any of the four stages of cognitive processing, we call that a cognitive processing issue. And it is important that you're able to recognize it when a student struggles as any of the stages, because it will help you understand how exactly to nurture that student's greatness, or how exactly to unlock that student's potential. It is very important. So cognitive processing issues are one of the underlying causes of uh, learning difficulties. When students can't, input information, the information that they are provided, they can't take it in correctly or completely. So some of them cannot process information, and some can't even store, meaning that they have memory issues, maybe short-term memory issues or long-term memory issues. Something they know today, they forgotten tomorrow, or even by the time they are in another class or a new session like this, they've forgotten what was learned last session. That's a storage issue or output issue. The application of whatever they learned is usually hard. So some students have one of those issues, and others may have more than one. Some can even have all four issues. So it is important that you are able to recognize the particular issues that your students have, so that you can help them and unlock their greatness. Cognitive processing issues usually cause learning difficulties, and in many occasions too, it is one of the underlying conditions in learning disabilities. So cognitive processing issues cause students to slow down because it affects how they take in, process, store, or use information. It really causes students to learn slowly, and because of this, when students learn slowly, research has shown that sometimes it is a temporary issue, perhaps maybe because of a learning difficulty. They are learning slowly, and because it is situational, as things improve, the students can learn at a better pace. But there are some instances where slow learning is due to a learning disability, which is a much more permanent condition. So slow learning is seen as both a learning difficulty and a learning disability. So it is important that you're able to understand, or discern, or even differentiate between when a slow learning student is having a learning difficulty or having a learning disability. So sometimes it is just a temporary situation, and for which you can use some in-house support, and to reverse it, or to make it go away. But if it is a learning disability, then slow learning must not be treated just as if it is something small, and you will need some form of expert intervention, because it is linked to a learning disability. So cognitive processing issues, or CPIs, can also make students perform below their abilities and potential. In as much as students have a potential, if they have cognitive processing issues, they will do below that potential, and that is what we call underachievement. So learning disabilities can cause learning difficulties, but not all learning difficulties are learning disabilities. So cognitive processing issues cause slow learning, but they don't necessarily are the only reasons why students underachieve. Students underachieve for reasons such as lack of motivation, lack of quality teachers, lack of parental support, and so on. But one of the underlying causes of underachievement is definitely cognitive processing issues. So there are three types of cognitive processing issues based on their causes. All cognitive processing issues fall into one of these three categories. They can be genetic, meaning that they are inborn wiring differences. For example, some cases of dyslexia are genetic, meaning that it is inborn, and the difference in how the brain learns is genetic. So this requires that you work around it and provide lifelong structured strategies. And this is why for genetic CPIs or genetic conditions such as dyslexia, ADHD, I usually recommend that you call for a trifocal meeting with the parents so that you can explain to them the extent of the interventions that the child needs. Because when a child has genetic CPI, the child needs a lifelong support. So they have to provide support for the child till forever, because it entails that they manage the condition. It's not reversible. So even if you provide your own support right now, if you don't keep providing it later, the child could still have issues or could still have cognitive processing issues. So it's very important that when you notice genetic CPI, you make sure that you carry all stakeholders along so that they can work around it by providing lifelong structured strategies. Now we also have a second cause of CPI, which is acquired, resulting from an illness, an injury, or even neglect and trauma. I've seen instances where a child had malaria, just malaria, a baby had malaria, and that caused him to have acquired CPI because of the extent that the malaria dealt with the child. So the other cause of CPIs are developed, resulting from environmental factors, or maybe skills were not built due to lack of exposure or other reasons. So they require enriched exposure and coaching to strengthen the mind. So let's talk about each one of these CPIs briefly and share examples. So genetic CPI, you need lifelong structured strategies to work around those differences. Examples are dyslexia, ADHD, dyscalculia, auditory processing disorder, and non-verbal learning disorders. So acquired CPIs, they often qualify as learning disabilities because they are usually neurological and long-term, require medical and educational intervention. Like the child I mentioned who had malaria and acquired a cognitive processing issue, you see that one requires a medical intervention. It is not just a teacher job or teacher intervention that is needed. So it has now caused the child to have a learning disability. And examples are maybe reading and writing difficulties after a traumatic brain injury, memory or attention problems after a stroke. Say the child had some stroke or seizures or something like that. And cognitive delays from severe neglect or emotional trauma. Say a child was locked in a room for many years due to, say, the parents, maybe a wicked stepmother or something like that. And by the time the child is out of that room or prison, begins to have an acquired CPI. So at that point, it is considered a learning disability because it is irreversible. It has become a long-term condition. I also have some instances where dyslexia is acquired, say from brain injury. Maybe he fell down at some point, and then the wiring in the brain began to uh, you know malfunction. So developed CPI require exposure, coaching, and practice to strengthen skills and cognitive abilities. These are the kind of CPIs that are common in students who used to do well, but maybe because of maybe they are now teens, they are now teenagers, they now started having teenager issues, and now they are beginning to do poorly, due to environmental factors, laziness, and so on. So they may have instances of poor reading comprehension, maybe weak numeracy or problem solving skills, the organizational skill issues. Maybe they don't have good study skills. These are developed CPIs are very common. Even you see them in students who have not been exposed. Maybe a student is now in SS3, but all the while they've not been trained on how to cope with the new pressure that comes with being in SS3. The pressure of doing WAEC, preparing for JAMB, preparing for UTME, preparing for maybe even other exams that are much more complex. So many times students just develop CPIs because they are under some kind of pressure, and it's common. So you just need to work on their level of exposure, coach them a bit, and then try and strengthen their skills so that their cognitive abilities can be at par with the current level that they are on. So developed CPI is very common. It's usually due to lack of motivation, lack of exposure, a lot of issues that are very common, even parental negligence and so on. So every child can learn. Our role is not to push them harder, however, but to open new pathways for them to unlock their greatness. So at this juncture, I'm very sure that some of your students come to mind, especially as related to all of these topics that we have been discussing. Learning disabilities, learning difficulty, slow learning, underachievement, and especially cognitive processing issues. So let's take a moment to pause for about 6 to 8 minutes, and then we treat a few cases, and we end this session, and then follow up with a post session question and answer. So welcome back. Let's start with this case. Ibrahim struggles with reading and spelling, and he often reverses letters. As usual, we list out the key issues, which are reading difficulties, spelling challenges, letter reversals, difficulty decoding new words, challenges processing written text. Our observation is dyslexia. Now, because of the fact that this dyslexia is a cognitive processing issue, we must, of course, use his strengths, because his weaknesses are too big for us to handle. So his strengths are exceptional visual memory. Ibrahim has exceptional visual memory for diagrams, charts, and faces. So that's why in the inclusive strategies we're going to use, we are supposed to use strategies that incorporates or can leverage on his strengths, which include color-coded notes. We can teach him how to use mind maps. We can teach him how to use the keyboard soon enough. We can, of course, use scaffolding and even sensory activities, multisensory activities. And of course, we should celebrate everyone's differences so that Ibrahim doesn't feel singled out when we provide support systems for him. So Khalid struggles to stay focused during lessons and often leaves tasks incomplete. The key issues: inattention, difficulty sustaining focus, is impulsivity, difficulty following multiple step instructions, frequent task switching. So observation, ADHD. So we are going to list out his strengths. He's highly energetic, he's creative problem solvers, quick thinkers, strong oral communication skills. These are usually strengths of people with ADHD. So the inclusive strategies that we use that can cater to Khalid's case should be related to his strengths, such as using timers and visual schedules. He's creative and yet he has inattention. So we use those things that can incorporate his strengths and reduce impact of his weaknesses. You can also provide structured routines, focus on his strengths, of course, scaffolding, reduce distractions during learning, and so on. And of course, celebrate everyone else's differences so that he doesn't feel. So for our next case, we have Aisha. She struggles to grasp new concepts quickly and often needs repeated explanations. So the key issues: she has low comprehension, difficulty retaining new information, needs extra time to complete tasks, she's easily overwhelmed with complex instructions, and she has low academic confidence. Observation: she's a slow learner, she has a developed CPI and a learning difficulty. So our strengths, we list them out, and then the strategies that we choose are based on our strengths, and of course reduce our weaknesses. And at the end of the day, we make sure that we celebrate everyone else's differences so that Aisha doesn't feel singled out. So here is another one. Zainab struggles with reading, writing, and concentrating after recovering from a traumatic brain injury. The key issues: she has difficulty processing information, she has memory gaps, she has slow reading and comprehension issues, she has trouble following multiple step instructions, she has fatigue that are affecting her attention. Observation: she acquired CPI or a learning disability. Her strengths, we list them out, which are strong verbal reasoning, creative thinking, good problem solving skills, and she's motivated to learn. So the strategies that we use are based on our strengths, of course, and they're supposed to mitigate our weaknesses, and of course we celebrate everyone else's differences. And lastly, we have Azan. Azan performs below his abilities in most subjects and often avoid tasks. This seems to link to stress, anxiety and low confidence rather than a lack of ability. So the key issue is low motivation, inconsistent effort, underperformance that is relative to his potential. He usually avoids challenging tasks, difficulty managing stress and his emotions. So our observation is that he has a case of underachievement. Also, he has learning difficulty that can be linked to psychological and emotional factors. So his strengths is a creative thinker, is curious, he quickly grasps concepts when he is engaged, and he has strong problem solving skills. Of course, the inclusive strategies that we use should be based on his strengths and mitigate his weaknesses. And of course, we consider the factors that surround the kind of issues that he has, and at the end of the day, provide support for all the other learners and celebrate everyone's differences.